Welcome back to Talem. Today's story is about an entitled neighbor whose obsession with controlling others' lives escalates to an unthinkable act of violence. Let's dive in. Here's what the person had to say about their experience. Vegan Karen shot me because I was fishing in my lake. I lived in a small lakeside community for most of my life. A place full of rustic cabins, gravel roads, and long-standing friendships. A place where on any given morning, you could hear the soft splash of oars cutting through the lake's still surface, or the rustle of leaves as neighbors walked their dogs in the crisp dawn air. We rarely worried about locking our doors, and there was always someone ready to lend a hand. In short, it was a community that I believed would be the backdrop of peaceful days forever. That all started to change the year Karen moved in next door. Back then, I didn't know her name, but everyone in our little community noticed her arrival. She came rolling in with her moving van, stepping out of the driver's seat with the clipboard in hand, shouting orders at the hired movers. I remember standing near my mailbox when she approached me for the first time, her short hair bouncing as she took brisk, determined steps in my direction. Karen's first words to me were, "I hope you don't cook any meat on your property. I'm a vegan and the smell makes me sick." She said it without so much as a hello or a handshake. That should have been my first warning. The entitlement, the immediate assumption that her preferences should take priority over everyone else's. I honestly thought she was joking for a moment, so I tried to lighten the mood and said, "Well, I do barbecue fish from time to time, and the occasional steak." She gave me a look of utter disgust, then asked if I'd consider seeing the light and going vegan for the sake of the animals. I hadn't even learned her name at that point, but I remember thinking, this woman is going to be a nightmare. It wasn't just her stance on vegetarianism. People can choose how they live. That was no issue at all. It was her tone, that self-important, domineering way she had of speaking. When she finally introduced herself as Karen, she did so with this slow, dramatic wave of the hand, as if she was doing me a grand gesture by offering her name. I told her mine, but she hardly bothered to acknowledge it before briskly walking away. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened, wondering if she was serious or if this was some kind of strange introduction to a new neighbor. But deep down, I had a feeling this was just the beginning of something troublesome. Walking away with a warning. I'll be keeping tabs on the neighborhood. I don't tolerate any form of animal abuse or slaughter around me. In the weeks that followed, Karen's presence became more pronounced. She would patrol around our quiet community, especially near the small patches of lawn where families like to grill over the weekends. If she smelled any hint of meat cooking, she'd walk right up to the barbecue station and give unwanted lectures about the moral horrors of eating animals. She'd say things like, "This is a crime against sentient beings," or, "You're all complicit in cruelty." She often repeated that she was only doing this for our own good, that she was saving us from unknowingly participating in atrocities. People mostly tried to ignore her. It was awkward, but we had never faced a situation where one neighbor was so openly hostile and intrusive about our personal choices. Over time, though, Karen's behavior went from frustrating to downright invasive. She started asking folks in the local grocery store about their purchases, peeking into their carts to see if there was any meat, fish, or dairy. If she spotted so much as a carton of eggs, she'd start in on them. "Do you realize you're supporting a system that oppresses chickens or eggs are just unborn chicks? Do you really want that in your fridge?" Naturally, people became uncomfortable. Conversations behind closed doors turned to nervous jokes about Karen the vegan enforcer. But it wasn't just jokes. Over time I came to realize that most folks were genuinely concerned about her capacity for extreme behavior. She was so intensely focused on policing everyone else's dietary habits and daily activities that it felt like a matter of time before something worse happened. As for me, I had a particular concern that put me in Karen's sights more than most. Fishing had been my lifelong hobby, and I owned a small private lake that sat behind my property. It wasn't big, maybe a few acres of water surrounded by tall pines, but it was something my grandfather had purchased decades ago. I grew up casting lines from its shores, learning from my dad how to bait hooks and reel in a good catch. The fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was part of my tradition, part of the connection I shared with my dad before he passed away. The lake was also strictly on my property. I had a fence, signs, everything to mark the boundaries. Yet despite my attempts to keep it private, Karen decided my lake was her newest moral battlefield. It all started when Karen saw me fishing one Sunday afternoon. She marched right up to the edge of my property, where I had posted multiple private property, no trespassing signs, and started yelling across the fence, "You can't keep all those fish captive. They deserve liberation." She screamed, "You claim ownership, but they're living creatures. They belong to themselves." I explained that it was a private lake, that fishing was both a tradition and a legal right I had. But Karen was outraged. She insisted that morally the lake was hers because she cared about the fish. Caring about them, in her view, gave her some higher moral claim than my actual legal ownership. First I brushed it off. Maybe she was new to the area and didn't understand how land ownership worked. So I pointed out my property lines and the signs, but she waved her hand casually as if local laws and posted signs didn't matter when stacked against her personal beliefs. The next day found that the signs I had posted were torn down. The wood posts had been snapped in half, the metal signs bent and thrown into the brush. I suspected Karen, but I didn't have any direct proof. Still, it wasn't hard to connect the dots, so I put up new signs, bigger and more visible. Sure enough, just a few days later, they went missing again. It wasn't just the signs. Sometimes I'd walk to my property line and find piles of raw vegetable scraps or rotting fruit, as though someone had tried to feed the fish in an attempt to ruin my fishing. It was strange and frustrating. I felt like I was under attack for simply enjoying a hobby on my own land. Over time, Karen's fixation reached a new level. She began watching me from her house using binoculars. I noticed her silhouette in her upstairs window, always there whenever I walked outside with my fishing rod. If I dared to grill some fish, I'd catch a glimpse of her behind the fence, eyes peering through the small gaps in the wood. It was disturbing at first. I tried to just go about my day and not let it get to me. But the harassment didn't stop at silent observation. If I even walked outside with a bag of groceries that might contain meat or fish, Karen would appear seemingly out of nowhere, like she had some sixth sense for flesh detection. As she once boasted, "I can sense the meat energy on your bags," she told me. It was so absurd that it almost made me laugh. If it hadn't been so deeply unsettling, she'd make comments like, "I smell blood on your hands," or, "Those fish died in pain, and you're going to pay for it eventually." I tried calling the local police multiple times, filing complaints about harassment and trespassing. They would come out, give her a warning, and she'd dial it down for a bit. But then, as soon as the heat was off, she was back at it, maybe even worse than before. She'd follow me to the water and scream from across the fence, or lurk behind the trees on the edge of my property. Felt like I was living under constant surveillance. The police, for their part, did take my statements, but they seemed hesitant to escalate the situation. It was a small town, and I suspect they hoped the matter would resolve on its own. They told her not to trespass and not to harass me, but Karen always found ways around it. She'd stand right on her property line, nearly tipping over the boundary. She called the station to complain about me illegally fishing. She'd claim I was killing innocent animals for sport, trying to present it as something akin to illegal hunting or even borderline deranged behavior. Still, up until this point, I never fathomed that Karen would actually turn violent. Yes, her actions were intense, and she was arguably obsessed with controlling my life and the lives of other neighbors. She had a loud mouth, a moral superiority complex, and a knack for stirring up conflict. But the idea that she would use physical violence, let alone a firearm, never crossed my mind. I mean, she was always preaching about nonviolence, about how important it was to live in peace with animals. She even claimed that all living beings, including insects, deserved to be spared. But then, as I would soon learn, her idea of nonviolence could be as inconsistent as her interpretation of property laws. One afternoon, I was fishing near the northern edge of my lake, close to Karen's property line, but still comfortably within the boundaries of my own land. It was a beautiful day. The sun cut through the canopy of pines, making ripples on the water glisten like tiny gemstones. The quiet had a soothing effect, a reminder of why I'd always treasured this place. Then Karen's voice shattered the silence. "Animal massacre!" she shrieked. I reeled in my line, partly out of surprise, partly out of frustration. She stood on her side of the fence, leaning over it like a vulture, ready to pounce. "What you're doing is a war crime," she yelled. I turned to face her. Her face was red, twisted with anger, her eyes wide and frantic. I tried to remain calm though. My heart was starting to pound. "Karen," I said, "I've asked you many times not to harass me on my own property. This is my lake. I fish here. It's entirely legal." She pointed an accusatory finger at me. "Legal? You can't hide behind flawed laws. Morally, you're no better than the monsters who violate the Geneva Convention." I blinked. The Geneva Convention? The treaties that govern wartime conduct. This was beyond insane. I asked her to leave, to stop trespassing, emotionally, if not physically, on my space. But she only grew louder, repeating her nonsense about me being a war criminal. I tried to ignore her and go back to fishing, but she kept ranting her accusations. Eventually, she stormed off, yelling something about "I'll be back when you least expect it." I stood there, heart pounding, feeling an uneasy combination of anger and genuine anxiety. I'd been dealing with Karen's nonsense for months, but this was the first time she'd crossed into outright delusional territory, equating fishing with war crimes was not only offensive, it was a clear sign that her sense of reality was warped. The only relief was that she eventually left that afternoon, allowing me a few more moments of calm by the water. A few days later, decided to grill the fish I caught. It was a Saturday, the weather was perfect, and I'd invited 2 friends over for a casual dinner on my porch. We had the grill set up with a small table next to it for spices. The aroma of grilled fish wafted through the air, mixing with the scent of pinewood and fresh lake breeze. We were sharing beers and laughing, trying to forget the dark cloud Karen had cast over the neighborhood. Then, sure enough, as soon as the fish hit the grill, Karen emerged from behind my fence. My friends saw her before I did. She walked straight onto my lawn, disregarding the no trespassing signs as if they didn't exist. She was quivering with rage, pointing a finger at the grill. "You killers!" she screeched. "How dare you cook those poor fish? They were alive just this morning." I told her firmly that she was trespassing and needed to leave. My 2 friends tried to back me up, telling her that we were simply having a private gathering and that we wanted no trouble. But Karen was in a hysterical state. She flailed her arms, accusing me and my friends of being complicit in slaughter. Her voice cracked under the weight of her screaming, and she wouldn't calm down. I threatened to call the police if she didn't get off my property. That usually made her retreat, if only temporarily. She yelled again. "I am the only one here on the side of morality. You, all of you, are criminals." This time, though, she didn't budge. She just stood there, panting heavily, her face contorted. I took my phone out and started dialing the police, but before I could complete the call, she muttered something about taking matters into her own hands. Then in an abrupt turn, she ran off, my property disappearing behind her fence. For a moment, I was relieved. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Little did I know the worst was still to come. The sun was setting on the same day, painting the sky in purple and pink shades. My friends had left earlier, more out of unease than anything else. I was left to clean up, trying to shake off the memory of Karen's outburst. A mild headache pulsed at my temples. I stacked the plates, utensils, and leftover fish in a tub on my porch, preparing to take it all inside. Suddenly, heard rapid, erratic footsteps on gravel. Before I could turn around, Karen was there again, practically sprinting onto my property. First, I thought she'd come back to yell more, but then I saw the gun. A small handgun clutched in her shaking hands. My heart lurched into my throat. "Karen, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice unsteady despite my attempt to sound calm. This woman, who claimed she couldn't stand violence, was pointing a gun at me. Every fiber of my being wanted to shout or run, but fear rooted me in place. She was trembling so badly that I could almost see the barrel quiver in her grip. Her face was a blur of conflicting emotions, anger, despair, maybe even a flicker of regret. But the anger won out. "You won't listen," she whispered. "No one will. You all keep killing and killing. I can't let you do it anymore." I kept my hands where she could see them, stepping back as cautiously as I could. "Karen, put the gun down. You don't want to do this. You're a vegan. You said you believe in nonviolence, right?" Her eyes flickered. "I am nonviolent," she muttered, voice cracking. "But you're forcing my hand. You're the violent one. You keep taking lives. Fish have families, have feelings." I glanced at the house, wondering if I could make a dash for it, but then everything happened in a flash. Karen squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out an ear-splitting crack that cut through the evening air. A burning pain tore through my foot. I collapsed, letting out a howl barely recognized as my own voice. She'd shot me. I lay on the ground, clutching my left foot. Blood seeped between my fingers, staining the gravel. A deep scarlet. My mind reeled, a blinding shock accompanied by the kind of pain that makes you wonder if you'll ever walk again. I remember hearing my own shaky breathing, feeling the world tilt. Karen stood there, gun in hand, gasping for a split second. Our eyes locked. She looked as shocked as I felt tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. Then she started rambling incoherently. Words tumbled out about "they made me do it," or "I had to save the fish." It was like she was drifting in and out of sanity. With the adrenaline surging, I managed to pull myself upright just enough to grab my phone from my pocket. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. I dialed 911 breathless, shout, "I've been shot. I need an ambulance. I gave my address." Every syllable distorted by the shock and pain. Karen didn't run. She didn't even move. She stood there, still holding the gun, tears streaming down her cheeks. I worried she might shoot again, but she just stood like a statue in the dim twilight. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, I heard sirens blaring in the distance. Neighbors started gathering, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. People gasped at the sight of me bleeding on the ground, while Karen just stared blankly. I remember one neighbor, a retired military medic, rushing to apply pressure to my foot. He barked instructions to others to bring towels, water, anything that could help. It was surreal, as if I was watching a chaotic scene from a movie. Only the pain in my foot reminded me it was all too real. When the police arrived, they found Karen still standing there. She had set the gun on the ground by then, raising her hands in a symbol of surrender. The officers shouted commands: "Don't move. Get on the ground." She lowered herself to her knees, still whispering under her breath about being forced to do it. The officers placed her in handcuffs while a couple of them rushed to me, trying to assess the damage done by the bullet. Soon after the ambulance arrived, my vision was swimming from the throbbing pain in my foot. The EMTs lifted me onto a stretcher. I heard fragments of conversation, something about shock, about needing to get me to the hospital quickly. As they rolled me away, I saw Karen leaning against a police car, tears streaking her face, but no sign of genuine regret. She seemed off in her own world, as if she still believed she was doing the right thing. After I was stable at the hospital, the responding officers came to take my official statement. They told me Karen was arrested without incident. Once they arrived, she was found with no license for the firearm. I asked them how she'd gotten the gun in the first place. They didn't have all the details yet, but they believed she'd purchased it illegally through a private sale, or possibly stolen it, as there was no record of her registering any firearm in our state. Karen spent the first night in jail, presumably in a holding cell, until they could schedule a bail hearing. The local police had finally seen for themselves how dangerous she could be. All the previous complaints and warnings had led them to label her a menace. But now, the gravity of her actions was undeniable. This was no longer just harassment or trespassing. It was a near-deadly act of violence. My foot, on the other hand, or rather, on the other leg, was a mess the bullet had gone clean through, which was a small mercy because it meant they didn't have to perform surgery to remove a fragment. However, it did a number on the bones and tissues. The doctors took X-rays and MRIs, explaining how complex. The foot structure is 26 bones, 33 joints, and more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, all working together. The bullet had fractured a couple of metatarsal bones and severed a tendon or two. I remember the doctor's serious tone. "You've got a long road to recovery. This kind of injury can lead to chronic pain, mobility issues, possibly arthritis down the line." I was so shocked that I barely took it all in. Painkillers dulled the edge of the physical pain, but emotionally, I was furious and scared. The idea that Karen had escalated to shooting me because of her fanaticism was unbelievable. She, of all people who'd gone on and on about saving living creatures, had just tried to murder a neighbor over some fish. Physical therapy became part of my daily routine. Once I got out of the hospital, a rehab specialist taught me exercises to stretch and rebuild my foot, though every step felt like walking on shards of glass. I had a cast for several weeks, followed by a brace that allowed only restricted movement. I'd never realized just how much I took standing, walking, even simply balancing for granted. Every little motion felt like a struggle, and my patience was constantly being tested through the long recovery process. Around the house, for granted, everything was a struggle now. Just getting out of bed in the morning required planning and a lot of grimacing. Through it all, neighbors visited me, bringing food, offering help around the house, and volunteering to keep an eye on my property. There was a palpable sense of shock in the community, a realization that something truly horrific had happened in our usually peaceful area. Some neighbors admitted they'd always been uneasy about Karen's constant meddling, but they never expected her to actually draw a gun. And ironically, a bunch of them told me that if she'd been that concerned about the fish, she could have advocated for a local conservation initiative or some form of protest, something non-violent, that might have at least aligned with her stated beliefs. But she chose bullets instead of discussion. Within a week of the shooting, the district attorney's office officially filed charges against Karen. They included assault and battery with a deadly weapon, which carried serious prison time. On top of that, she faced charges for the illegal possession of a firearm, as she had no license and had never gone through any legal channels. The district attorney even mentioned adding penalties for using a firearm in the commission of a crime. I found it strangely comforting to see the system working as it should. There was no doubt here she had trespassed, shot me, and admitted it in front of numerous witnesses. The question of her intent was also under examination. Was she trying to kill me or just scare me? Did her obsession push her to extreme violence? The district attorney made it clear that given the proof, they weren't going to let her claim it was just an accident. When Karen's lawyer spoke in court, they tried to frame the shooting as a blunder. They insisted she only intended to frighten me, to make me understand the importance of my actions against animals, and that she accidentally pulled the trigger out of fear. The lawyer even went so far as to say that Karen sought to protect other living beings and didn't realize the gravity of brandishing a firearm. It was a thoroughly weak defense, especially considering the month of documented harassment and threatening behavior. Karen herself was given a chance to speak at one point. She used the courtroom as a platform to rant against me for crimes against nature. She called me a slaughterer in front of the judge. There was no guilt in her voice, no acknowledgement that she had permanently altered my life by crippling me. Instead, she doubled down, painting herself as some sort of hero for animal rights. She said she had no choice but to take drastic action because nobody would listen. It was terrifying to see how firmly she believed her own rhetoric. Or maybe she was just that deceptive, hoping to craft a narrative that she was forced into violence by my indifference. Her lawyer tried to soften the impact by claiming Karen was emotionally unstable, suffering from some kind of breakdown at the time of the shooting. But the prosecutor had a field day. With Karen's months-long history of vandalizing my property, stalking me, and harassing the neighborhood, it was clear this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern of escalating actions that climaxed in gunfire. After a lengthy trial, Karen was found guilty. The judge handed down a prison sentence, citing her lack of regret and the premeditated nature of bringing a firearm onto my property. I could see Karen's face from where I sat in the courtroom. She seemed stunned, like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. How did she let her fanaticism drive her to this point? But any sympathy was overshadowed by the suffering I'd gone through, by the endless hours of pain, and rehab, by the knowledge that I'd never feel entirely secure in my own home again. The sentencing hearing concluded with the judge reprimanding her for taking the law into her own hands and risking my life for something as insignificant as a disagreement over dietary choices. I heard later that Karen tried to contest, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. After all, she'd been caught directly, literally, by multiple witnesses, while her exact term in prison was never publicly disclosed. Beyond the initial sentence details, I knew it wouldn't be just a slap on the wrist. She was gone. For years, at least. I ended up moving away from the community a few months later, not because I hated the town, far from it, but the memories were tainted. Every time I looked at my lake, I felt the phantom pain in my foot. The bullet wound had healed, but some scars never truly disappear. The emotional weight of living in a place where you were shot in your own yard is unbearable. Despite the love I had for that lake, for the quiet mornings on the dock, I knew it was time for a new start. As I was packing my boxes, I got a postcard from one of my neighbors. It read, "We miss you, and we hope you find peace wherever you go." I realized that despite one deranged individual, the heart of that community was still the warm, kind place I'd always known. In a sense, Karen's existence, there had been an abnormality, a dark twist in an otherwise peaceful world. I never found out what happened to Karen. After her sentence, maybe she moved away. Maybe she found a new cause or continued to obsess over her old beliefs. Part of me worried she would track me down, but I told myself she wouldn't bother once I was far away and she had lost her immediate target. Whatever the case, I refused to let her shape the rest of my life. And that's the story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Talem.